It was a really cold and rainy morning on the 1st of June 2002, and we were living in Stellenbosch at that time. We got up early on the Saturday morning, and my wife Renee took out some photo albums, and we were looking at it, and we were at Trafalgar Square, and the pigeons were sitting in Hansie's hair. He had curly hair, so the pigeons could get their feet stuck in his hair. And as we were looking at these photographs, the phone rang, and it was my cousin Hettian calling from Bloemfontein. I could hear in her voice that she was really worried, and she said, "You need to pray. Hansie's plane has gone missing." Apparently he got onto a cargo plane at about midnight from Lanseria and flew to George. The plane was due to land at about 7 o'clock, and no one knew where the plane was. And I still said to him, "Man, you know Hansie, he gets himself in trouble, he gets himself out, so don't worry about him." Half an hour later, we were already getting worried because the plane was still gone.
George is quite bad, it's going to shake a bit, but we should land in about 10 minutes.
And I just said to Renee, "Listen, I can't sit here and wait. You and the kids stay here. I'm going to drive through to George." And I started driving, and as I started driving, the phone just started ringing. You know, people from all over South Africa and then from all over the world, media started calling. Eventually, almost 2 hours into my journey, Gavin from the company that owns the plane called me and said that they found the plane. It's crashed on a mountain. They don't know whether Hansie is dead or not, but they'll try and get a rescue team down to the crash site and see whether there's any survivors. I called my mum at that stage.
Funny enough, the first thing that I had in mind was I really prayed that God would spare him dying, having to die in the sea. I just said, "Well, Lord, please, if it must be, let it be the mountains." And only about 2 years later did I realize it was a prayer answered, because they did die on the mountain, and I could see him.
And then a few minutes later, Gavin called and said, no, they managed to get down to the plane. There were no survivors. Hansie and the 2 pilots were dead.
When I arrived on the scene, the aircraft was lying here, the fuselage was here, and the wings was just about where I am now.
Yeah.
The wings was lying. The right hand wing was still burning, and it was the only part of the aircraft that was burning. The fuselage didn't burn, and neither the left wing. So when I came down here, the left hand side of the aircraft was tore open. So when I arrived here, the first person that I saw here was Hansie. I've put my fingers on the pulse, and there was no life.
I then had to call Bertha, Hansie's wife. I had to call my parents and my sister and my wife and tell her that Hansie was dead.
We've flown with a mail aeroplane before, and Hansie done it before. Then he would say, "Wheels touch ground," and then I would just left here and go and fetch him. But the people used to stay here, and I asked him that day, does he want to catch a lift with them? And he said no, he's quite eager to get home. They've got paperwork and things to do. Well, please come and fetch him immediately. He'll send me an SMS when the wheels are on the ground. And yeah, I waited.
And because of all the phone calls prior to that, my phone's battery went flat. So I couldn't do anything but think and pray for the next 2 hours through to George. And it got me thinking about Hansie, just thinking back of the past 2 years prior to that, after the King Commission, and how difficult it was for Hansie. And I often told him after the King Commission that we need to write a book, or we need to make a documentary about his life, simply because he had gone through so much and he had learned so much, that it would really be a pity if it wasn't well documented so that people could learn from it. And Hansie always just said to me, you can't tell a story until it's finished. And on that day, the 1st of June 2002, I realized that the story was now finished and ready to be told. It still took about 2 years until July 2004 before the family and everyone was ready to participate in doing research for a biography that we wanted to write then. At that stage, we didn't even consider a film. But as we were doing the research, I realized there was just so much drama in the Hansie story that it would really make a great feature film. He then appointed Garth King to write the book.
Well, I was never a sports reporter. I had very little interest in cricket, especially after Hansie's death. And out of the blue, I received a phone call from Frans Cronje. Some friends and acquaintances of mine had recommended me as a possible writer for the biography. And Frans and I met at the waterfront, and we had a discussion, and he seemed quite interested. I think one of his concerns was that he wanted somebody who hadn't prejudged Hansie, who wasn't even particularly interested in Hansie.
Both of us got into our car, and we then set off from Cape Town for the first interviews in Bloemfontein. And by the time we got to Bloemfontein, I think Garth was totally dead. It took him 2 days of sleep to recover from the 10-hour trip, because I spoke non-stop from Cape Town through to Bloemfontein, and he was taking notes in the car going through the Karoo. Garth eventually rested well. We stayed with my parents, and he got to know my parents. But then the first formal interview was with Mr. Johan Volstead, or Follies, as he's fondly known by the Grey Boys. And I think it was quite a shock to Garth's system, going to assembly and hearing the boys sing, hearing the war cry. I think that shook him up already, and then the interview with Mr. Volstead overwhelmed him so much that he had to go back a second time to interview him again. But that set us going, and then from Bloemfontein, where we interviewed then my parents and many other people, we drove to Durban. These guys are still very emotional about the whole Hansie story and how they really loved Hansie such a lot, and it'd be interesting to see what interviews we get out of it here.
My wife, who's played golf, she understands. She would never phone and interrupt me on the golf course. I remember walking down the 18th at Durban Country Club. It was my halfway, so after 9, the pro came out and he said, "Please, would I phone home urgently?" And I knew that something was serious, because some of the kids or whatever. And Jody just said to me, "Hansie's dead." I couldn't believe it. I just wept. I wept like a child for days. I could never really accept, because he became so much part of my life. Every day I used to speak to him.
That again brought the story so much in the open that it was emotional. It was difficult for my family, it was difficult for my parents and for Bertha. But I think in the process we learned how much the book meant to many people. We had so many emails and faxes from people saying that the book really changed their lives. It helped them to get a new perspective on their own lives. And that really was the purpose of writing the book. And it really is the purpose of producing the feature film. It's to learn from Hansie's life and be inspired by it, even though he had messed up, even though he'd made mistakes. But I think the important part is, how did he manage to stand up? How did he manage to rebuild his life? And what could we learn from that?
Words cannot describe the shame and the guilt that I feel. I would like to start by apologizing to the South African public, the cricket authorities.
With the biography doing so well, we thought, well, this is not too difficult, so let's produce the movie now and get that out of the way as well. And I think then we realized that producing a movie is a slightly different ballgame. The magnitude of the project was just so much bigger. I always thought that the Hansie movie would be the first film that I would produce, simply because he was my brother and that it's a easier marketable project. But somehow it just never really got past first base. We got some money from the US, and then we had a few writers, 3 writers writing screenplays. Somehow it just didn't work. Somehow, nothing wrong with the writers, but the screenplays just didn't carry the heart of the story like it was supposed to, and we just never got past that. And then towards the end of 2005, we broke for December holiday, and during that holiday, I just realized that the first movie we're going to make will not be Hansie, but it's going to be a story called Faith Like Potatoes.
That's why I say trust God. Trust God. Don't be gripped by the fear of what El Nino can do to you, but be gripped by what God did for you through Jesus on the cross.
And it did extremely well in South Africa and is now going out worldwide. It's impacted so many people's lives, and I'm really thankful that we produced Faith Like Potatoes first, before Hansie. I learned many lessons in faith during that movie, and I think if it wasn't for that, we would certainly not have been able to carry on through to the end with the Hansie movie. But it was also great because then people could hopefully get to know me as a producer of movies like Faith Like Potatoes, and not just the Hansie movie. because that was one of the criticisms that I got from the media, was they thought being Hansie's brother, just jumping on the bandwagon and producing a book, producing a movie about him just trying to make money. And money is not the object, but it's really telling stories that inspire. Eventually, we, through selling Faith Hike potatoes worldwide, landed up in Los Angeles and met up with a company there. And that company then were interested in Hansie, and after some months, we signed a deal with them where they would purchase the worldwide rights to the Hansie movie. And with that agreement in place, we then started producing the movie in South Africa. And we got bridging capital in order to pay for the first few weeks while we were waiting for the money from LA to come through. In desperation to try and get a good script going, I then sat while we were in Los Angeles during that same trip and wrote out a 13-page treatment of what I think should be in the Hansie movie, what heart should it carry. And everyone liked it. By then I'd appointed Richard van der Berg as director and Frank Rautenbach as lead actor again. And from there we then decided, okay, we'll use that treatment as the main script, as the base of the script. And then I wrote the screenplay myself. It was an interesting process. It was the first screenplay that I wrote. And then by August 2007, we were ready to start principal photography. The principal photography took us to Cape Town, George, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Wynberg in the Free State, Bloemfontein, London, and then Mumbai. And then the first thing that happened as we got back in South Africa, there was newspaper reports on the front page that the Hansie movie was in financial trouble. And suddenly, it felt like the world was tumbling down. And what had happened at that stage was that the company in Los Angeles, their funding deal was dependent on another company in the UK, and that fell through. It didn't work out. So it became a hectic 4 weeks of negotiations and trying to make it work, trying to get alternative funding. But it was really difficult. It was most probably the most difficult month in my life. Coming back after this 10-week shoot, really being exhausted and not being able to rest at all, working non-stop through the day and night because I was communicating with Los Angeles. So you would work during daytime in South Africa, and at nighttime when they wake up in America, continue to work and trying to make the funding work until we eventually got to the end of November. And it was just a black week where just nothing worked out. Nothing we tried worked until we eventually realized, look, the funding is just not there. And I thought, well, that's it. We're going to lose absolutely everything. I remember on a Friday afternoon here, after that week, just sitting here, just weeping of exhaustion, really. I was just absolutely exhausted. And I remember my wife walking in and just trying to comfort me, but I was just so tired. And thought, well, that's it, we've lost everything. But fortunately at that stage, one of the guys that provided bridging funding from Johannesburg started getting involved and said, listen, he'll help to manage things and organize things. And then we had to get all of the creditors that was involved. I mean, we were then owing money to so many different people because of the funding not coming through, and then had to get them together in a meeting and explain to them what had happened, what had gone wrong, and say to them, but listen, we don't believe we should just stop the process. We don't believe that we should just give up and, okay, write off the money and liquidate the company. It was a worthwhile project. It was looking really great. And we then made a deal with everybody that they would allow us the time in order to complete the movie. Again, after that meeting, I thought it would take a couple of months to sort out. And 9-10 months after that, the process was still carrying on. It was extremely tough process legally and financially in order to put in place. And as I'm sitting here today, it's not 100% complete, but we're pretty much there now. I would say we're on the sort of 98 or 99% complete with the process, and certainly learned a lot in the whole journey of having to do that. And then at the same time, in these 9 or 10 months of having to sort out these legal financial issues, we had to, of course, make sure that the movie stays on track, that we keep on producing the movie. And that was a challenge in itself because we had such limited cash flow then for post-production. We moved away from our offices. We had big offices that we were renting that we then decided to move out just to save some cash flow. And we moved into our home in Durbanville. It's again been quite tough on my wife and kids because the kids come back from school and here we are, we just occupy the whole house. There are files, offices, computers, cameras, and people all over the house for months now, and we've got another few months before we actually complete all of this. We kept a small team at Global Creative that worked really hard, most of the time not knowing if we'll have money at the end of the month to pay for everyone, but everyone just kept going, and it was fantastic to see. And then also at a very critical time, the Waterfront Studios in Cape Town contacted me. They obviously knew about the financial difficulties, and they offered some solutions. You know, they wanted to find out where we were and what had gone on, but they were fantastic in saying, okay, we know there are challenges. All we're going to do is to find out how can we actually work out these challenges. And with the Waterfront Studios getting involved, it meant that we could just keep momentum. The incredible thing is that we never lost a week of production, you know, because I think if that had happened, it would have been disastrous. I think that would have meant the end of the movie. Here we were at a place where the funding didn't come through. As the director of the company at that stage, I was the one that was responsible, even though we had a team of people. And I had to receive grace, you know, and even though people were upset, they extended that.
We've worked with him before on Faith Like Potatoes, and it was amazing to see how he is the Vrystaat boer that he confesses to be. The way he really, with determination and dedication, just keeps going when things really don't go well, and it seems like there aren't really solutions for what he feels passionately about. And for me, it's really a parallel of, I think to an extent, what Hansie's life was like. The way he persisted with dignity when all the odds were literally turned against him.
As the Hansie story was so much about messing up and getting going again, that certainly contributed, I think, to the richness and to the authenticity of the movie. You know, we eventually had a completed movie sort of on a picture side, so we were ready to add the music to the movie. It's incredible to see the difference that music makes to a movie. I think it's similar to a body without a spirit. It's only once the spirit is blown into a body that there's life. And that life in the movie happened at Abbey Road Studios in London when Julian Wiggins's music was performed by the London Session Orchestra. And it was incredible to listen how Julian managed to combine this big orchestral feel with some African sounds, and it really has come over magnificently well.
The music's doing its job in a movie, it doesn't draw attention to itself.
Then back home in South Africa, when we eventually had a 35mm print, I was up in Johannesburg at the video lab and film lab, and they were playing out the final movie. And by then I'd seen the movie 1,000 times, and I thought, oh, this is, you know, not another time having to look at the movie. And yet, watching the movie, you know, in that little cinema there was just so emotional yet again. And I realized, you know, thankfully we have a nice movie. Thankfully we have a movie that's really emotional and it's really going to impact people's lives.
I know the reasons why the movie is being made, and I find that very precious, and I would like to think that we're supportive of Frans in his whole project. I just look at it from from a distance. It's a story being told about a young man who belonged to a family, and if the moral of the story can save but one soul, then it's fine with me.
I think it's the type of story, whether the family are involved and do the film or whether somebody out of Hollywood or somewhere comes along, it's the sort of life that somebody will make a film out of somewhere down the line. So it's maybe better to have it done by the family involvement and have it a more, shall we say, balanced view than just becoming a Hollywood story that of the hero that went bad sort of thing, which suddenly becomes very dramatic and a lot of fiction put in amongst the fact. So I think there was a need to do the film, and even with the book as well, because the biggest worry is somebody somewhere will do it, and if it's not, shall we say, controlled, then it can become more hurtful. Obviously it's a very emotional time for the family. There's a lot of things that aren't in the film that we would have loved to have put in the film, like his passion to be a test player long before we even looked like getting back into test cricket, when he used to drag me out of bed and go for runs at 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever, or go with Zola Budd for runs at 5 o'clock in the morning, because he said, when we get back into test cricket, I want to be ready. That was the sort of drive he had behind him.
I think the movie being so much about standing up once you've made mistakes, getting up and getting going again, that was another lesson. We certainly made enough mistakes in this process. We certainly hit brick walls often enough in this process, and it looked impossible at many different times. But the key here was never to give up. You know, fortunately, we just kept going, and we just kept going. We never gave up. And if that's one thing I would like the public, especially the South African public, to walk out of the cinema feeling, is that they never need to give up. There's always another chance. You always have another chance to rebuild your life. You always have another chance to get up. Whether it's financial trouble, whether it's relationship trouble, whether it's any other problems you have, just don't give up. The 2 weeks before he died, I met with him in Pretoria, and we had a great time, and I could see the old Hansie was back, and you could see that he had his life back together again. And I really don't see his death as a tragedy. I really see his life and death. We all live, we all die. What you do in between, what you do in those years in between birth and death is important though.